and make it available, those question and answers, as we had a Brown Act training. My point is that we should have that instead of going through it line by line. It would be, if we're trying to streamline it and maintain transparency, which we should be doing, it would be much more conducive, in my opinion, to just put it on our website as the minutes, so that people who may not necessarily know what those questions were can have access to it and can understand. Because I believe everyone in the public has the right to know, not just the public who have the time to come to our board meetings and can make their schedule is conducive to our board meetings. That's the point I'm trying to make. And that it goes along the lines of this item on page 4, which is under meeting preparations, and on page 5 under meeting minutes. That's what I'm speaking to. So it's just, if we could talk about it, we could debate it, but I feel strongly that we need to make sure that there's dialogue and discussions on the items, and it shouldn't be it should be encouraged, not stifled.
But that's what we're doing.
Well, it's a little bit, I understand that may be the intent, but that's not what's going to be. It doesn't feel that that's going to be the case. It doesn't, from what I see here, because on one hand, we're stating that we want to be transparent. We don't want to be Orwellian about this. On one hand, we're saying we're being transparent. On the other hand, we're saying we're going to streamline these board meetings just to make sure, and then it has to be subject to the superintendent's discretion on whether or not he can answer it, which I understand the description that you provided earlier.
Not answer the questions. Questions can always be asked and always can be answered. We're talking about two things here. One is what happens prior to the meeting in terms of questions, and I think lots of board members ask questions of lots of people and they get answers, and they may want to ask some of those questions again at board meetings for good reasons. But then the separate question is what's in the minutes. And I think what you want the minutes to reflect is not what people say, but what board actions are taken. And President Oakley, were you trying to make a comment?
Well, yes, and I certainly understand all of the concerns that are trying to be addressed here, and I just want to sort of draw a circle around this. In 2004, I believe, the board took action to create action item minutes, and a very similar debate happened in 2004. The board at that time agreed that it wanted to move to action item minutes, and in doing so, it also reduced the amount of staffing required to keep up with the previous minutes. So there was almost one full FTE that was laid off at the time. And so obviously the board has been struggling with this part of the minutes in this recent year, and understand what we're trying to accomplish. And let me be very clear, and if it's not clear in the document, we can certainly work on it. The point here is, there are two issues, as Jackie pointed out. One is responding to questions. And yes, there are 5 board members that at any given time have a question about a board item. And yes, if the board agenda goes out on a Friday afternoon and it's 48 hours, then staff will get back to you by Monday morning, but they need time. And this isn't the superintendent president responding. I wish I had everything at my fingertips. This is staff responding. This is the entire fiscal staff, HR staff. And so we do want to help streamline this, because there's a lot of work being done in preparation for each board meeting. The second thing is the minutes. And it's certainly up to the board to debate whether they want to change the policy. And that's certainly up to the board. If we change the policy, then we need to consider how we staff the new policy. But currently, we've gone back and forth over what's included in the minutes. Currently, the policy is action item minutes. And so it becomes very difficult for the board secretary to then determine whose comments are going to get in the minutes. And so if that's the board's pleasure, then we need to relook at how we staff the board meetings, because there is an awful lot of discussion taking place. And yes, Trustee Zia, absolutely, if your questions are presented and they're answered, they have to be presented to the public, and we will ensure that that's done. So there are 2 or 3 different issues that we're trying to negotiate here, and hopefully we can keep them all in their separate boxes because they are related to the Brown Act. But with regard to the minutes, that's our challenge, is trying to figure out, do we stay with the current policy? And I think the recommendation is to affirm the current policy, or does the board want to change the policy? And if so, we need to relook at how we manage board meetings.
Okay, well, I appreciate that point, and perhaps the proper vehicle, since we're negotiating, it doesn't sound like the Trustee Otto is in favor of the minutes, but the minutes being changed to include Q&A between trustees and the administrative staff. But maybe we could just post it on the website instead of giving it out to the public that attend. It is 2 different things, and I'm suggesting that if it's not going to be covered under minutes, that we add a new bullet and address that, so that we are making sure that we're inclusive. And again, in the spirit of transparency, as the document states, it would be more transparent if we do that. So I'm going to just move on because I have other comments. And so this on page 5 again. Again, please don't take this personally. These are just, I'm talking about the document, not the authors. But I just feel that if we're forcing all the trustees in the interactions with internal constituent groups, and again, this is how it comes across to me as the reader and others, forcing all trustees to direct their request for meetings with internal groups to the superintendent president's office, and forcing them to be open to all board members is a clear violation of the First Amendment rights. I feel strongly about this. And, we should be, as Board of Trustee members, should be able to speak with whomever we want, when we want. I recognize the importance of not directing staff, as, the trustee, Community College League trustee handbook states. And, I looked it up, and I have some citations that I want to bring to your attention that is contradicting, this policy or this document contradicts that. I mean, we don't want to direct staff. At the same time, we shouldn't be prevented to talking with people on internal stakeholders and working with I can understand from a standpoint of working with the superintendent's office regarding meetings with administrative staff, but don't see the necessity when it comes to student groups, employee bargaining units, etc. I question the legality of that, and would like to get a legal opinion outside legal counsel. And if you look at the trustee handbook, page 24 and 93, that discusses that. And I would just invite you to look at that. It does say individual trustees have no authority to direct any staff and make no representation, but it doesn't prevent you. Trustees come from all walks of life, and they are encouraged to talk to folks. And then page 93 of the, I'll just cite these if you want to go reference, if you want to look at it. It says the board is responsible to study and identify future community interests and needs. So it's important. The community is not just external, it's internal. We need to do that, and we shouldn't be prevented from doing that. Page 5 of the document, it's, again, I spoke to it earlier about it opens up with after acceptance and approval of this report. So just for the record, this is not going to be accepted tonight. This is going to be accepted at a later time. Right. And it also talks about the college will adjust all necessary administrative regulations accordingly, so they reflect the recommendations made within the report. Are these administrative regulations and associated policies each one of them going to come before the board for approval?
No. Regulations never come before the board. They're not approved by the board. They're just administrative regulations, but all policies do, because what we are is a policy board. But let me parse this a little bit. It says, after acceptance and approval of this report by the Board of Trustees as modified, if necessary, the college will adjust all necessary administrative regulations accordingly so that they reflect the recommendations made with this report. It doesn't mean the recommendations made right this minute. I started off this presentation by saying, here's the schedule. Tonight we're going to talk about this stuff. You're going to have a month to come up with whatever time that we're going to do, and then we'll try and adopt some things to keep things moving. But, you know, I mean, this is going to go on for several months, and there'll be plenty of opportunity to do this. And it's not fair to say that this says that we're going to adopt these recommendations.
No, I'm asking the question and confirming, so I appreciate you confirming my understanding that, but is it, maybe Vice President Gable can answer this, but the administrative regulations, as it was explained to me, are associated with individual policies. Is that correct?
Most administrative regulations are tied to a policy. Not all regulations are tied to a policy. So as Board President Otto mentioned, all board policy changes come to the board as a first reading, and then as the next meeting, it would come to the board as an action item. When it comes to the board as an action item, typically the associated administrative regulation comes to the board as an information item only.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that the policy, the applicable policies for those administrative regulations will come to the board for discussion, debate, and approval.
If there's a change to the policy, it will come to the board for debate and approval. But you are seeing the administrative regulations, and those are information items. Those change whenever we don't change the policy each time we change the administrative regulation. We change the administrative regulation to keep up with the policy and any changes happening on campus. So that is why any possible administrative changes are in this document so that the board can see them ahead of time. If there was a need for a policy change, absolutely, it would be brought to the board because it would require your approval.
Okay, great. Thank you. And page 6, I'm really, again, nothing personal, but I'm baffled by this. There's quite a bit of language used here that I believe is problematic. Like when, what does it mean to be honest about your identity and upfront about your role? I mean, is this, I'm sorry if, again, with all due respect, but am I supposed to broadcast each time I'm on social media that I identify as a proud Persian Jewish American woman with a master's in civil engineering? I mean, it just is confusing what that's about and what the intent is. There's the fourth bullet, it says refrain from speculation. Again, this is a First Amendment issue, and it's a problematic provision. If the comment is expressly identified as being based on hearsay or speculation, trustees should be permitted to make such comments, and they shouldn't have their First Amendment be infringed. So, and then the seventh bullet on this page. This is the trustees should be permitted to use social media as a way to measure, should not be permitted to use social media as a way to measure constituent opinion. I mean, I have to say I'm stunned by seeing such language because it's, trustees should be able to talk to their constituents, whether it's internal or external, about getting their opinions on college issues. I mean, how else are we supposed to seek their needs and interests and encourage their participation in helping establish policies as their elected representatives. Again, this is well codified. This precise point that I brought up is well codified in the California Community College League's Trustee Handbook, page 28, 45, the Code of Ethics section, page 57 and 93. So I would invite us to look at that and really include those provisions. I take quite a bit of exception to this because I believe that it may be well intended, but it really hinders some constitutional rights of us as both citizens and elected members that have a duty to our constituents. Our constituents elect board members for each district. They don't elect a team. They, as we all know. So, while we may have disagreements, we could still be collegial and cordial, but I believe that we shouldn't be prevented from having that discussion with our constituents. At least that's how this comes across or implies, and the impact of this document in my world.
Let me tell you where that comes from, where it says, do not broadcast your intentions to vote one way or another on that particular issue. The reason for that is because I've seen legal cases where votes have been disqualified because it's been determined because of statements that people have made, voting, trustees or whoever they are, members of city councils or whatnot, ahead of meetings, it's decided that they've prejudged the issue and that they weren't available to the public debate on a dais like this or some other, however it is that they're voting, and therefore, they were prejudiced ahead of time. And so it doesn't say don't have opinions, and it doesn't say, all it says is don't be telegraphing what your votes are, because what could happen is you could be disqualified from voting on a measure, you could have a vote overturned, and it's just,
it doesn't say votes, Trustee Otto. It says opinions. That's the part that I have a hard time with.
I think as individuals, we have the right to give our opinion on any matter.
Right.
But and you're correct that it's our constituents that elect us to the board. But I think once we become board members, then we have a responsibility to the constituency that we serve, and that's the constituency here at this institution. And as such, I think that's where we need to work together as one body and, honor the one voice. I think that's the difference. And so I think what we say here is that, yes, you can give your opinion. You're entitled to give your opinion, but that's as an individual, not as a representative of the board.
Oh, it's unclear, and I take exception to not being able to give an opinion on a matter, because let's say if there is a matter before the board. Now, this hasn't happened to me, so I just want to preface that, and this hasn't occurred, but if there is a matter pending before the board, and there may be my community members who have a differing viewpoint, that may be able to express that, and it may change my opinion as their elected representative, because it's not my opinion that I'm necessarily representing. I'm representing the community. We're elected by the community, and we should protect their interests. So how else are we supposed to seek that before voting? I mean, is it like we had the other day that they can opine or provide comments after a contract is approved? I mean, it's silly. It comes across as though we are prevented by not being able to dialogue with our community members and constituents to get their opinion on how to vote.
Yeah, Board President Otto, may I give some clarification?
Sure.
First of all, the statement above these bullet points clearly says that the trustees are encouraged to utilize social media as a communications tool, and then presents the following best practices, guidelines that can help the trustees use these forums effectively. So the intent here is to help the trustees understand what some of those best practices are. And I will speak from my own experience on the regions. I had extensive training from the regions on best practices, and certainly no one is asking anyone to stifle their First Amendment right. What we're trying to do is to ensure that you understand what some of the collective thinking around social media and boards has been, and try to help prevent any problems from occurring. So the issue that was brought up, refrain from broadcasting opinions on matters directly pending before the board. That specifically refers to action items that are coming to a board meeting. I'm not going to tell any board member how to form their opinions, but when there's a public dialogue where all the trustees or all the public may be construed as not participating, it could be a Brown Act violation. Now, I may disagree with that interpretation, or you may disagree with that interpretation, but somebody may not. So that is all we're trying to accomplish here. Nowhere does it say that you have to abide by these. These are guidelines.
Right.
And so certainly if there are other guidelines that you've seen or any trustee has seen that it can help other trustees communicate in a way that does not create a problem for the board as a body, we're happy to include them. But issues of maintaining confidentiality, ensuring that we consider the diverse audiences of the college.
There's no question there, the President Oakley, Superintendent Oakley. I appreciate you clarifying. The problem is, it's not really a problem. It may come across as though, we're trying to fix one issue that may be viewed as not as big of an issue of First Amendment. In my book, there's nothing above the Constitution. No matter how many policies we put together, I mean that takes precedent. So we don't want to, be, what is the expression, penny wise, pound foolish, and try to provide best practice at the same time, create a problem where we have this First Amendment and free speech issue. And in fact, I take a direct exception to that when I will seek my constituents' opinion if need be it depends on the case before I take action. And I will have opinions on the matter, and they may persuade me otherwise. So I don't want this to turn into this guide. On one hand, we're saying it's a guideline, and then it's encouraged, and I like that language. It's best practices. On the other hand, it's going to form into a policy, and then we're going to have people.
No one's saying that this is a policy.
Well, it's going to turn into a policy eventually.
No, that's not the recommendation. The recommendation is to change administrative regulations. The only policy that's even been discussed is a policy on minutes. That is the only policy in this document that could even be discussed at this point.
Yeah, and again, to put this in context, this is an appendix. It's offered as something that people can consider, and what the beginning of it says is social media platforms offer the Long Beach Community College District Board of Trustees and other elected officials an ongoing opportunity to communicate directly with multiple audiences and share thoughts, ideas, news, and information through discussions, postings, photos, and videos at online networks such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Instagram, and more. Trustees are encouraged to utilize social media as a communications tool. The following best practices guidelines can help trustees use these forums effectively while protecting their personal and professional reputations. So, I think this is kind of much to do about nothing, because nobody says you can't do anything. It makes some recommendations about places where people have gotten in trouble in the past because of things that they've done, and I've probably seen a dozen of these different guidelines for different colleges and different places, and you learn some things, you agree with some things, you disagree with them. I see no First Amendment issues here. I'm not a...
I do, the trustee, and I just want to express
Sorry, I just wanted to finish.
Sorry.
And so, this is, as I said at the beginning, the beginning of the consideration of something that's been brought to the attention of this board and predecessor boards as an issue at Long Beach City College, and that's communications. It's an effort, a beginning effort, to address some of those concerns. Some people are going to agree with some of this and not with other parts of it, and then they're going to disagree about lots of things. So this is the beginning of a dialogue. This is an educational institution. What you have in educational institutions are dialogues so that you can come up with things that you can agree on that are important. And yeah, there are a number of specific recommendations, but this isn't even a recommendation. This is, hey, consider this. And I mean, if you want to get an opinion from a lawyer that says that,
Well, if it's consideration, I understand. You're right. I just want to make sure we're all clear that it's a best practice. It's not going to turn into some policy that'll, we're held to account on it. It's just best practices and encouraged.
there's nothing here that even implies that. I mean, it's a boogeyman question.
And the bottom line, it's about improving communication. And it's about facilitating the process of communication. And also it's about being considerate of the role that each one of us plays in this process. I mean, I get concerned that if we're all calling, Anne Marie at the same time, and she's got to spend time answering my questions, and she's got to spend time answering Doug's questions, then again, we have to be considerate of the work that everyone is responsible for doing and how we all need to, work together. So that, therefore, we make recommendations for protocols just to facilitate the process, to facilitate the communication. That's really what this is about.
Right. And I agree with you, Trustee Archuleta, and there's no disagreements there. It's just you asked for questions and input, and I'm providing that to you just for the future, for consideration. That's all.
And you make good points, and you ask good questions. So, yes, well taken. Thank you.
And let me make an analogy in the context of what we're doing here, and that is just like on a court of appeal, when you're trying to reach a decision about something, the collegiality of that group is very important in terms of the quality of the decisions that get made. And there's negotiating and there's back and forth, and eventually, from the respect among the justices on the Court of Appeal, they come up with better decisions. And there are legendary judges, John Minor Wisdom in the Fifth Circuit down in New Orleans, other judges, Henry Friendly in the Second Circuit in New York, who are able to bring people together and over time produce good laws and good decisions. There's definitions of trusteeship. There are writings about what it means to come together as a group of people to make decisions, the best decisions in the interest of our students, of this college, and the directions that we're heading. But it requires people to work at it. And the intention of this document was to begin a discussion and to hear, just like we're hearing today, and I truly appreciate your thoughts about this, and they're going to continue while we, over the next 60 days or more, consider this report, which we considered important enough to appoint an ad hoc committee to come up with recommendations in the interest of furthering trusteeship, in the interest of furthering how we govern and improving the way that we govern. So that was the intention, and nobody's trying to ram this down anybody's throat. We welcome everybody's input about this. That's why it's available on board docs. That's why people can communicate with us. And by the way, if anybody wants to talk individually about this, I'm sure each of us or more would be happy to talk about these things. It's the way things get done. This last thing about social media is kind of a warning, and that is, be careful, because sometimes things can happen on social media that you don't intend to happen, and it tries to point some of that stuff out appropriately or inappropriately. But I think that's all it's saying, and I actually am encouraged by this discussion because we don't very often discuss things like this, and it's healthy. So. Jeff.
So this is an informational item. You were going to bring it back in a few months to where some things can be flushed out. I appreciate it. And I just, earlier on, so I apologize coming in a little bit late in the discussion. It's going back and forth. I'm going to go through a few things, especially with the areas of, with the electronic communications. And that actually went even beyond. I'll give the example why it was important. I'm glad it's being addressed.